I am beyond honored to welcome my dear friend this evening, Dr. Michael Bledsoe, who served as pastor for 27 years at Riverside Baptist Church in Southwest Washington. And I believe we became friends very shortly after you came to the church. In his years at Riverside Baptist Church, my friend was especially noted as an activist advocate for issues of peace and justice. And in my heart, he was known as a friend of the Jewish people. As just one vivid example, during his 1983 visit to the Soviet Union, Pastor Bledsoe walked through Babi Yar in Ukraine, which, as we know, was the murder site of over 33,000 Jews by the Nazis during a two-day period in September of 1941. Pastor Bledsoe then made it a yearly practice to recite the names of those who were slaughtered there in this season of remembrance at the Hall of Remembrance, the United States Holocaust Museum. Pastor Bledsoe and I attended together the opening ceremonies the day the museum was opened, sitting outside in the cold weather in the rain. He retired in 2019 from the church after leading the church to a complete rebuilding of the building in the major redevelopment that was going on in Southwest at the time. Today, he lives nearby in Arlington with his wife, Melinda, who we're also so glad to welcome. We're honored to have you with us as well, Melinda. He lives also nearby, his daughters, Kelly and Kristen, and his beloved nonagenarian mother, who just came to live in their home as they care for her. His topic for this evening is Dispatch from Campo to Ghetto, Nuovo. It is with joy on this somber evening that I welcome him to our Micah community.
Leon Wieseltier, in his book of remembrance, Kaddish, wrote, "In a world where we die, nobody may be allowed to live superficially. I am here this evening in an effort to live less superficially. I'm here with you on this sacred evening as an act of remembrance for the lives of the perished in Shoah. This is not the minute of silence offered at award shows for the recently departed, that thin ribbon wisp of nostalgia. Instead, we're joined to millennial cycles of Sabbaths and feasts that navigate us existentially and ritually through history. Forgetting the past, and not just any past, but what is perhaps the historical equivalent to an astronomical abyss like a black hole. Forgetting that is a betrayal of the dead and an abandonment of the future. By such remembrance, we fulfill a sacred obligation, and by so doing, attach ourselves to an entire symbolic universe encoded and transmitted by millions of Jews over 3 millennia. So, while Shoah was sui generis within history, it nonetheless is not understandable apart from 3,000 years of Jewish history writ large. Nor, sadly, can it be understood apart from 2,000 years of Christian history, marred by the pathogen of an anti-Semitic bloodlust that erupted as pogroms, inquisitions, and other assorted, hideous, heinous crimes. Any individual, any congregation of people who understand remembrance as an act of sacred obligation are also likely to have grasped that it is an act of holy defiance as well against forces of hatred aligned for the diminishment of the dignity of the created world and its inhabitants. And we remember, not in some abstract philosophical way, but in the particular and detailed pixelate matrix of our lives, our families, our towns, the cities in which we live. And hence, when the functionaries of fascism send out their minister of information with blonde hair and a golden cross dangling about the neck, when they send out the minister of justice with blonde hair and a silver cross dangling around her neck, our eyes sting with piercing recognition. We have seen Aryan Christofascism. We're familiar with its codes, its co-opting of religious symbols, its Orwellian titles that say the exact opposite of what they intend, and we're familiar with the deportations of the other. Remembrance of the perished of the Holocaust is a sacred, humane action. It's also a righteously defiant one. About the past, but not confined to the past, its lessons and warnings striate across timelines into the present. As noted, I'm here to rise above my culture's superficiality glazed over absolutely everything. And I'm here to engage in remembrance as both sacred act and defiance. But it seems to me anyway, what is essential for a minister of the Christian tradition, such as myself, on this night is to acknowledge that the murderers of the Holocaust were primarily baptized, as Elie Wiesel reminded us. And with that, then, Christians would do well to practice silence and listen. I have sought silence in which to listen. As Danny noted, in 1983, I walked into what appeared to be a valley, but was the site of a mass grave in Ukraine called Babi Yar. I sought to listen when I visited Yad Vashem and our own United States Holocaust Museum, where I would enter the Hall of Remembrance during days of remembrance in order to recite Ukrainian names of victims. And I listened when in 2012 I visited the Campo del Ghetto Nuovo in Venice. And I offer you now a dispatch from my brief visit there. Occasionally I would send Rabbi Zimmel a postcard of a Jewish site of significance I had visited. One such sepia postcard I sent to him was from Venice. It was a 4x6 glossy of the Levantine synagogue in the Campo del Ghetto Nuovo, part of the Jewish ghetto. And I had arrived in Venice during a brief sabbatical that turned out to be my grief tour for my father, who had died just prior from Alzheimer's. But on a bright day 23 years ago, I entered the Jewish ghetto of Venice. I knew vaguely what had happened there. In 1516, the Senate decreed that the Jews present in the city be confined to a separate enclosure, segregating them. And I knew that the Nazis had occupied them in 1943, carrying off 243 persons to concentration camps, mostly to Auschwitz-Birkenau in 1944. And by this time in my life, I'd also become familiar with the emotional seismograph within me whenever I visited these gestures to the ruined world. I would be deeply saddened. I would be outraged. I would look around and wonder how. That day in 2012, I stood in the corner of the square before the Holocaust Memorial by Arvid Bledsoe. Deep in thought, I read and studied the bronze panels that depicted the horror of one Jewish community as it was shoved into the conflagration. What I had not anticipated that day was a kind of epiphany, a moment. I would use the phrase, I woke up. I'd use it without hesitation. It's an ancient phrase utilized by many religious traditions, to be awake. I had walked into a small piazza, a square filled with light. Near its center, a leafy tree, perhaps the tree of freedom, planted in 1797 after Napoleon had freed the Jewish residents there. Along the margins of that square were restaurants, cafes, mothers pushing children in strollers, adults seated together having discussions over coffee or tea. I walked slowly through the square, oblivious to the children playing there, and I headed to that brick wall where the bronze bas-reliefs of the Nazi occupation were depicting the rounding up of residents. I stood there before those plaques. Then suddenly, a child of about 10 years old came up to me and must have spoken to me in English because I don't speak Italian, and because I distinctly remember this child saying to me as he held a soccer ball under one arm, "Excuse me, please move. We're playing a game." This is what awakened me. I was startled out of my solemnity and my sadness by the chutzpah of a child willing to shuffle me off his playground. And I was awakened to the reality that swirled about me. This was a luminous square within which Jewish community was at work and play, where children safely played a game, even as an adult read how this had at one time been the deportation site of persons, because a misanthrope and monster somewhere in Germany had been supported by millions of accomplices to eradicate Jews once and for all. Home to 5 synagogues, the Jewish ghetto was and is a vibrant and living memorial to the lost and the murdered. Is this not perhaps the best kind of memorial? Living Jews who are quite busy actualizing their lives. Now, as is ordinary with a dispatch, there's a footnote, and I want to share this footnote with you. A year later, in 2013, rabbis of the Levantine Synagogue discovered buried within a synagogue some treasures that had been buried there as the Nazis threatened their community. Indeed, burying such items in times of crisis was not so unusual. As the Canadian poet and novelist Anne Michaels has written in her novel Fugitive Pieces, in the Zudica, the Spanish silver sitter with hinges in the spine, the talith and candlesticks are being buried in the earth under the kitchen floor. Letters to absent children, photos are buried. While the men and women who place these valuables in the ground have never done so before, they go through the motions with centuries of practice guiding their hands, a ritual as familiar as the Sabbath. All across Europe, there's such buried treasure. A year after my visit, an article informs us, a cache of silver and bronze objects from the 17th to the 20th centuries, hidden away from the Nazis during World War II, has been rediscovered and restored. When Nazis invaded Italy in 1943, two elderly Jewish religious leaders stored the pieces in a secret hiding place within a Venetian synagogue. The treasures remained untouched for more than 60 years. The synagogue where those items were buried, the Levantine Synagogue. And there I had stood, along with others, of course, unaware of what treasure was hidden just across the threshold. And yet this is my dispatch from the Campo del Ghetto Nuovo. Hidden, as it were, in plain sight is the greatest treasure, a living, authentic Judaism. I glimpsed it there more than 2 decades ago. I have witnessed it here in Temple Micah for 3 decades. So, a boy, otherwise occupied with being a boy, made his request known to me, and I got out of the way. Prior to his request, I had been reading one of the tablets, and on it a quote from André Torque, a former member of French combat forces. There I stood in a corner of that square, just prior to the interruption of my silent vigil by an earnest boy, and I read, "Men, women, children, masses for the gas chambers, advancing towards horror beneath the whip of the executioner. Your sorrowful Holocaust is engraved in history, and nothing shall purge your deaths from our memories, for our memories are your only grave. We will not forget. We remember in order to safeguard the future, and were there no future, we would remember because of the utterly sacred nature of such remembrance. And we remember holding out for hope, a gift very often brought to us by children." Amen.